got a call in the middle of the night. Here was the dispatcher. They had a home invasion and possible homicide. The responding officers find a door that was open.
Is it a targeted attack?
There's a seedy side to the Silicon Valley.
I was finding some, in my opinion, bad habits.
We're talking about drugs. We're talking about sex.
The faces in the room were completely stunned. It was kind of a drop mic moment.
It's about power.
How did they come into contact if he wasn't there?
Our role as CSIs is to find the evidence, to catch the killer in the crime scene. You've got a community in fear. Is this going to happen to them? Are they at risk? The science will tell the story. Science doesn't lie.
In California, police race to the scene of a violent robbery after a woman makes a frantic 911 call.
One of the bad guys had gone into her bedroom, punched her in the face, and then made her go out there with her husband where they bound her as well.
The homeowners have been assaulted, tied up, gagged, and blindfolded.
Then they pretty much ransacked the house.
Once gone, the woman managed to break free and, still blindfolded, desperately called for help.
They found the female victim, cut the tape off of her eyes, and continued searching for the other victim. They found him on the floor unresponsive. He had been bound by the wrists with a tablecloth, but they had used duct tape to tape around his head. Responding officers cut his bindings, roll him over onto his back, started CPR and rescue breathing until the paramedics can come in.
It's not clear at initial outset whether the victim is alive or dead.
The paramedics came in and checked him, put leads on him, oxygen sensor on him, and declared him deceased. I was definitely shocked. I recognized him. I had met him before. It was Mr. Kumra. Mr. Kumra was definitely a very successful businessman, and he knew a lot of people in the community. I didn't find anybody that disliked him. I had met him several times at different things, mostly at bars in town. He used to go to one that was called Last Call, and that was mostly all locals. And he always seemed to be sort of like the ambassador or the mayor of that group. Always happy, always nice, buying people drinks. Everybody loved him.
His wife is sent to hospital with facial injuries.
And when we talk about that world of criminality, unfortunately, you have individuals that are prepared to do extreme things.
Not only did they lose a family member, it's going to affect the living victim probably the rest of her life. It is a traumatic event. It is super traumatic.
Investigators cordon off the scene and begin a forensic sweep.
The house is an absolute state. Everything's been thrown everywhere. It's going to be a long and meticulous examination of items within that scene you might get forensic evidence from.
This property was huge. It was about 7 acres in size. The house itself was about 7,000 square feet. You can't even really see the neighbor's house. Me and my sergeant, we talked about where should we be looking the most. 2 crime lab people walk with us.
What's important, what's not important, what needs doing urgently, and what can take a little bit longer. So what are your quick hits? What are your fast track actions that are important in this investigation?
DNA evidence was going to be our best evidence.
The female homeowner tells officers there were multiple offenders.
There was at least suspects in the house and maybe one outside who was doing the driving.
where there's been more than one offender and more than one victim, you'll get mixed DNA profiles. That means DNA from 2 or more individuals. Sometimes you can separate them out. One of the first things you need to work out is, how has the offender got in?
The intruders have made off with expensive jewelry and over $30,000 in cash.
I couldn't tell at that point if it was a targeted situation, but it was just a theory that we started with. You just passed 30 other houses with no gates. Why are they picking this house?
There was no sign of forced entry. That makes me think that it's either someone that has got a key to get in, or someone that's been let in, or there's been an insecure door or window where they've climbed in or walked in quite freely.
There was no broken doors, but there were a couple of unlocked doors. The sliding glass door that was just off of the family room where the TV was on, and we figured that Mr. Kumra was watching, that door was unlocked. It looked like they had encountered him in that room, kind of struggled with him, taped him up, and left him there. It seemed that they would have had some sort of knowledge of the residents and of the people that were living there.
If there's no signs of forced entry, that says to me that the offenders have really planned this out.
Your first point of call would always be people that they know.
Raveesh's wife tells police the man who assaulted her used his nickname Ravi, suggesting he might have known him.
He could have done any house. So there had to be a reason. Homicides in Montecito, I think that this homicide was probably the first one in 20 or more years.
In California, the peaceful community of Montecito has been rocked by the first murder in the neighborhood for decades. During a violent robbery at his home, Raveesh Kumra has died after being beaten and bound.
Everybody in the neighborhood was super concerned. It's a very affluent area. A lot of CEOs and sports athletes and people like that live out there. Very quiet, very nice place to live.
Silicon Valley, the home of the wealthy. We're talking about exclusivity. We're talking about the super rich.
In our area, we would see things mostly burglaries where people are breaking into cars. In the downtown area where the shops were, we'd get a lot of theft during the day.
When a crime of this magnitude happens within the local area, it sends the police force into a bit of a frenzy because the rich and the wealthy are going to want answers.
An autopsy determines the cause of death is asphyxiation after being gagged with duct tape.
The victim had been bound around his head and nasal passage, which has obviously restricted his breathing. There was also a huge amount of bruising on other areas of his body. He had succumbed to a vicious attack.
The pathologist also finds that the 66-year-old had a heart condition, putting him more at risk.
We know the wife of the victim was saying he's ill, he's poorly. Despite the fact that they may not have intended to kill, they were very prepared to engage in high levels of violence.
It's Sergeant Erin Lunsford's first time leading a homicide investigation.
It was definitely a little bit overwhelming. Everybody was looking at their video cameras. Unfortunately, anything we did get was super grainy.
There's going to be a lot of pressure on the police to be able to solve this crime.
At the crime scene, CSIs have identified a number of potential leads.
One of the sinks within the property contained a number of latex gloves, about 21 separate gloves, and it appeared that these had maybe been washed. There was a lot of soap on them.
As we searched, we found more gloves in some of the cabinets in the kitchen. They had used a white duct tape with black mustaches on it to tape around his head. We collected all the pieces of tape because we figured there's going to be some DNA on those. We even collected the empty tape roll.
I'm just going to swab the end of the tape here, potentially where it might have been held by the offender. There's a lot of contamination from the victim, but on the ends of the tape there may well be fingerprint evidence in the sticky side, but there also may be DNA evidence.
20 exhibits from the crime scene are sent off for DNA analysis.
These things were left around and kind of suggest to me there may have been panic that have set in. Could it be that they watched and observed at the moment where Raveesh was, taking his last breaths, and maybe it's like, now I need to leave, without really thinking about the kind of evidence that they were leaving behind.
Detectives are convinced the attackers were helped by someone close to the Kumras.
One of the theories that we were working on was that somebody who had been to the house had given the information to the suspects to be able to commit this crime.
The fact that there's no forced entry of the property means that potentially it might be somebody that the victims know.
The first people we look at are family members. You got to look at them and talk to them, see if they have any idea of what happened. From there, then you go to employees or close friends. They hired a lot of people to work at the house. They had personal assistants, they had gardeners or handymen, just trying to paint a picture of the life of the victims and where the bad guys would have contacted them or come into their lives.
Raveesh moved to California from northern India in 1970 and went on to make his fortune in the mobile phone industry.
He made a ton of money. From there, he took his money and bought a winery and a concert venue in Saratoga, California, just a little ways down the road. And he did that for a while until he sold that off. And I don't know what he was doing at the time besides being retired.
This is a well-known member of the community. People would have seen him out and about at parties, at social events, spending money. So there may be individuals in the community that are familiar with this wealth and familiar with this success.
We need to know, what does he do every day? Who comes over to the house a lot? What are his habits? Who's he talking to?
At the scene, investigators seize his laptop.
His cell phone was actually found out in the middle of the street, all smashed up. So the laptop was definitely one of the most important pieces of evidence that we found.
There's a huge amount of knowledge that can be obtained from a laptop. What websites have been looking at, any contact details of people. The police have to go through each one of those contacts to see where they were at the time. Do they have an alibi? Are they a potential suspect?
As detectives look at Raveesh's contacts, forensic scientists examine the multiple latex gloves found at the scene.
The gloves would be exhibited separately. It'd be important to kind of look at whether these gloves have been worn. This glove looks like it's been taken off and pulled inside out. So therefore, you have to look at the best place to swab for DNA. So the best place would be around the cuffs and also on the inside of the finger areas. So therefore you need to tease them open. There would be a lot of pressure on the police to investigate this quickly. And from a forensic perspective, you don't work quickly. You work slowly and meticulously, and it takes as long as it takes. And sometimes that's quite hard to manage people's expectations.
As scientists analyze each glove, police looking into Raveesh's lifestyle have a development.
When I started looking into the backgrounds of the people that Mr. Kumra liked to hire, I was finding some, in my opinion, bad habits. It was determined that Mr. Kumra liked the company of sex workers. It was something that he did a lot of, and it was several women.
So when we talk about offenders and the pool of offenders, that net starts to get wider and wider.
Detectives look more closely at Raveesh's finances to trace the women. Meanwhile, forensics has a breakthrough. They've identified 3 suspects: Lucas Anderson, Javier Garcia, and D'Angelo Austin. Garcia's DNA has been found on one of the gloves in the sink. and Austin's is recovered from a piece of duct tape.
D'Angelo Austin was living up in Oakland, California, an hour north of where we were at. We immediately focused on him and people that he hangs out with.
We've got Silicon Valley, where Raveesh comes from, what hasn't seen a homicide in 2 decades. And then we've got Oakland, which has the highest crime rate in California. And even though the worlds are completely different, there's some common themes that bring them together and then align them. Money.
Austin and Garcia are identified as members of the notorious ENT gang in the ghost town area of Oakland.
You know, this gang has a number of names. You got ENT, you got Stubby, you got MOET, you know, money over everything. This kind of highlights what the group is all about. Austin is considered one of the founding members of ENT. You know, he would hold so much status. This is an individual that will be well known. He grew up in an environment where these behaviors of criminality, violence, chaos even, would have desensitized him.
The third suspect, Lucas Anderson, appears to have no connections to the gang. But the evidence against him is damning.
So one of the samples we would take at a post-mortem stage will be fingernail scrapings and fingernail cuttings. This is to see if there's any DNA or any fibers or hairs that have been caught under somebody's fingernails. If someone's been putting up a fight or trying to protect themselves, there may well be DNA or fibers under their fingernails that would link back to the offender.
Lucas Anderson's DNA is matched to a sample from Raveesh's fingernails.
It felt really good. It felt good. I felt like I was finally starting to get the evidence. We figured that we had 3 suspects and we had 3 good suspects. DNA found at the scene or on the body of the victim. They all had criminal histories. So I felt, man, we finally got this.
But first, they need to find them.
It was very frustrating. We could never pinpoint where D'Angelo Austin was at. He didn't really have a residence. He was couch surfing, or the money he was getting from robbing people, he was using it to stay in hotels and just spending money everywhere.
They're known to the police for a reason. They're criminals. They're not going to be easy to find.
Lucas Anderson is the exception.
I was able to find that Lucas was already in the county jail in custody on something else.
He was arrested a few days after the attack on the Kumras on unrelated burglary charges.
I went down to the jail to do an interview. He came in to our interview room. He was acting, I don't know, nonchalant or like he didn't care.
They are going to be charging you with a crime tonight. They charge you with a crime? Yeah. For what? Wonder.
He was shown pictures of the victims. He said he didn't know them. He didn't know where Montecito was. He had never been there in his life.
Your DNA was found at our crime scene on our victim. Starting to ring some bells? I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't.
And he just said, well, if you think I did it, like, whatever. My DNA's there. He goes, I have no idea. I wasn't there. Never been there before. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
With no alibi and his DNA on Raveesh's remains, Lucas Anderson is charged with first-degree murder. Santa Clara County assigns him a public defender. Immediately, something doesn't add up for Kelly Paul.
Lucas was pretty open when we first met. Not all clients are. You can imagine with histories that people can be guarded. He's not that person. Doing some kind of a sophisticated gang-level crime did not fit who he was, nor did it fit his criminal history.
Born on the streets, Lucas Anderson has a mental health condition, alcohol addiction, and brain trauma after being in a serious traffic accident.
When we do a social history workup for a client, we're going to work to get to know Lucas, not as just in that crime, but who Lucas is as a person, how he grew up, You're looking at every aspect of someone's life that could be mitigating. That includes childhood trauma. That includes mental illness. It includes many things. But for Lucas in particular, we knew there had been a mental health history, so it required us to start pulling records. The first step for us was to just hit every county hospital because we knew that Lucas had grown up in the area.
As Kelly's team hits the phones, police have a location on D'Angelo Austin.
We determined that he had a sister, Katrina Fritz, and that he was supposed to be staying with her because he was out on parole at the time. He was calling his sister and she was lending him a rental car. Then we were able to work with them to get the GPS so that we were able to pinpoint him to a car and where it was going.
Surveillance teams also locate Javier Garcia. Both are brought into custody on suspicion of murder.
Guys like this who have been questioned by the cops a lot, they're just going to shut you down. Both of them denied everything and invoked their rights to an attorney.
Based on the DNA evidence, they're charged with Raveesh's murder and burglary. Sergeant Lunsford still needs to work out who provided them with information about the Kumras.
Then it's my job to connect the dots more. So we obtained records for cell phones, we obtained records for calls and text messages. Another thing that we collect, the records from the cell towers. DNA is the big center block, and then everything else is connecting the dots.
The team's strongest forensic evidence is Lucas Anderson's DNA, found on Raveesh's body. But after scouring through medical records, his defense team has made a case-shattering discovery.
I think it was the investigator called and said, "You've got to see these."
The DA called me and said, hey, the defense attorney for Lucas wants to have a meeting. Says that she has an alibi. And I said, well, that's interesting.
In our world, alibis have to be perfect, and it was an absolute airtight, complete alibi.
How did his DNA get there? It was on his person. So how did they come into contact if he wasn't there?
Police investigating the death of Raveesh Kumra have charged 3 men after forensically linking them to the crime scene. Lucas Anderson's DNA was found on Raveesh's body, but his defense team is convinced he's innocent and have called an urgent meeting.
So we went, me and the DA on this side of the table, and then Kelly, the defense attorney, and all of her people on the other side of the table. They hand out a binder, and I start looking through it right away and saw that he had been in the hospital at the same time the crime was being committed.
We learned that Lucas had been hospitalized from before the homicide happens until after it happens, and that he's on literally 10 to 15 minute bed checks throughout the whole evening. The faces in the room were completely stunned. It was kind of a drop mic moment. They made no comment at the end, and they said, "We'd like to discuss this and we'll get back to you."
As a crime scene manager, it makes you then question how his DNA actually got into that scene. Sometimes it's quite hard to timeline when that's been placed there. So just because you find someone's DNA in a crime scene doesn't mean to say that it was put there at the time of the offence. It could have been put there several days earlier, or even potentially several weeks earlier.
Lucas insists he can't remember anything from that night or ever meeting Raveesh.
Lucas struggles. He had significant mental health issues. He also had traumatic brain injury, which affected his ability to be a historian and his ability to communicate. He had a series of friends that also lived on the streets with him, We had walked the streets during the investigation to meet those individuals, and they were very protective because of some of his deficits.
You know, him being an individual that's just thinking about somewhere to sleep or just being able to, you know, have something to eat. If I was in that situation where I was told that my DNA scientifically was at a crime scene, I'd be feeling scared. I'd be feeling anxious.
In California, anytime that someone's charged with a homicide, one of two things is possible. If convicted and those allegations are found true, a person is eligible for the death penalty, or they may have life without the possibility of parole, meaning that they will never get out of prison.
If he is innocent and he's sitting in jail because of me, I need to get him out.
Lucas has already been in custody for several weeks. An inquiry into how his DNA was at the crime scene is launched.
We knew we had an innocent person on our hands. It's like, oh, good Lord, now what? Because now we're fighting to get somebody out of custody. And that's its own battle. In particular, with, again, everybody's beliefs around DNA and that it's the gold standard of guilt. You really only had two options. One was lab error, contamination within the lab, or there was transfer.
There's a potential that if I touch a surface that someone else has touched, I could pick their DNA up from that surface and move it somewhere else. Because it's so sensitive, you could have like secondary and tertiary transfer of DNA, and that can become a massive problem.
The first thing they did was they looked at the crime lab and they looked at cross-contamination.
All the forensic scientists must have been seriously worried about where the contamination has come from.
I think that was more of a stress point for me until they did their internal investigation and said, no, it wasn't at the lab. And once that happened, then it was like, okay, then I've got to figure out how this happened.
Sergeant Lunsford looks at whether Lucas could have had any interaction with the Oakland gangs.
We had no information of how they had tied Lucas as one of the perpetrators. For people that do have significant gang connections or gang crimes, you'll see a history over that from juvenile all the way through adulthood. There was none of that for Lucas. If you were some gangsters wanting to commit a crime, you're not really going to take Lucas along for the run.
On Lucas, I've struggled finding anything. I found more and more and more on the other suspects.
The gang have a history of drug trafficking and committing residential burglaries.
These home invasions are the typical MO for a lot of gangs because it's get in, get out.
Intelligence has found the gang targets Asian heritage families.
Some criminals target particular groups of people. And when we're talking about people from the South Asian community, we're talking about these stereotypes that they hold loads of gold and jewelry and cash within their households.
They found to have posted a number of music videos bragging about money.
Typical of many inner city gangs, to talk about their lavish lifestyles, the things that they can attain through criminal activity. It glamorizes a particular lifestyle. One is not just about what you hold, it's about power, it's about status, it's about respect.
In one video, experts notice a chilling lyric.
They mention duct tape, which really signifies that duct tape is definitely a tool that they utilize whenever they engage in these particular criminal behaviors.
Convinced someone who knew the Kumras helped them, the team tracks the men's movements on the night of the murder using phone data.
All I had was DNA. I was just trying to make sure that I could show that with the evidence to show that my theory was correct. You can watch them on their phone traveling all the way down to our area and then back again.
Cell site data is good, but it can't exactly pinpoint where someone's been. So although the offender's been in the area, they need further evidence to tie him to the actual crime scene.
We obtained records for calls and text messages, so I was able to go through the text messages and see who they were calling, what the conversations were about.
As Sergeant Lunsford trawls through hundreds of hours of call and text logs, inquiries into Raveesh's finances reveal things aren't what they seem.
With all of the spending and the luxury lifestyle that he lived, it comes to a point where the wealth starts to decline. He doesn't have as much money that he once had. Discovering that now starts to enable the investigation team to start thinking about, well, who are the potential suspects? Who did he owe money? Who has he been giving money?
Raveesh has been giving several of the women he paid for sex large amounts of money and lavish gifts.
He actually started families, had relationships with them, paying them to raise their children, his children and theirs. And we were trying to determine if any of the women that he had hired or had relationships with were involved. It was several women. We had to find and interview and see if there's somebody out there that maybe had not been able to get that extra money.
One name stands out: Katrina Fritz, Austin's sister.
When we started looking at D'Angelo, you're looking at who his family is. So that name popped up there. We found out that Mr. Kumra had been having a relationship with Katrina Fritz for probably around 10 years.
Katrina has visited Raveesh at home hundreds of times.
She was seen as the main girl. She would have been around Raveesh in some of his most, intimate moments. So she would have seen absolutely everything.
She would have access to the residence. She would be able to know which doors are commonly going to be unlocked, what he's going to do at night, how the house is laid out. It was kind of putting it together to me that she could have been the inside guy. It was making me feel like, okay, I'm really getting this down now. I think I have how Mr. Kumra was possibly targeted, how they were linked together, and how they knew to go up to this house up on the mountain, up outside of town. It was enough for me to get an arrest warrant, and they were able to find her and take her into custody. We interviewed her for probably 2 hours the first day. She tied some things together, all in regards to her relationship with Mr. Kumra. He had been paying her for sex. He was also just giving her money. What their plans had been, trying to create a family.
The beginning of their relationship was at a time when Raveesh was in the midst of his glitz and his glamour. We knew that a car was being brought and jewelry was given.
On his laptop, detectives find he signed a letter agreeing to pay her $30,000 towards a down payment on a house.
Then financial issues on his end was leading to less financial assistance for Katrina, so they just kind of drifted apart.
We know that there was a decline in his money and not having the same amount that he once had. He may have got to a point where he didn't want to give as much money or give her the gifts or the things that he once was giving.
She insists she doesn't know anything about the robbery or her brother's movements.
When we started talking about her brother, she just told us a bunch of stuff that was just lies, and I knew were lies.
Call data shows in the hours before the murder, they spoke 4 times. During the calls, Austin tells his sister he's outside the Kumra's home, watching Raveesh. Confronted with the evidence, Katrina clams up.
She ended up ending the conversation after about 2 hours.
Katrina Fritz is also charged with murder. But although convinced they finally found the go-between, police believe there are more people involved. There is still unaccounted for DNA at the crime scene.
When the crime lab was processing the DNA samples that we found, there were several partial DNA strands that they found.
If it's a partial profile, it's really difficult to load that to any database because it could hit against hundreds of names. When you actually can identify who the suspect is, then you can match that suspect against that partial profile.
To make their case watertight, the team needs to not only identify the other intruders, but solve the mystery of how Lucas's DNA was found at the crime scene.
You need to ensure that no other DNA in that scene could be as a result of contamination.
that actually for the defense team can be utilized as an opportunity to say, well, if there's doubt about that DNA, then there's also potential doubt about the gloves, about the duct tape.
During my trace of Mr. Kumra's last 24 hours, I looked to see, well, is there a place where he could have run into Lucas? And I couldn't find any of that.
Lucas was living on the streets, kind of a 4 to 8 block radius in downtown San Jose. So you kind of, if you are looking for Lucas, you know where to go look for him.
I looked at it from both sides and I couldn't figure it out. What linked Lucas Anderson and his hospital trip to my victim? And in the end, I figured out how it happened.
Police in California, investigating the murder of tech entrepreneur Raveesh Kumra, believe they've solved the mystery of how Lucas Anderson's DNA appeared at the crime scene, despite him never being there.
It was the paramedics.
On the night of the murder, paramedics were called to treat Lucas after he was found blackout drunk outside a store in downtown San Jose.
2 paramedics transported Lucas to the hospital. And an hour or so later, were called to my crime scene. They treated Mr. Kumra, determined that he was deceased. So that was the common link between the two. I spoke to them and I said, well, how did you treat him? And they said, well, what we would do is we come in, put the leads on him, put a pulse oximeter on his finger. I mean, I can't 100% prove it, but logic says that they did not clean the equipment well enough. And that's how I believe it happened, is their pulse oximeter transferred a little bit of DNA to the fingertip of Mr. Kumra. And that's how Lucas' DNA got there.
You're talking nothing. You're talking a few cells now that they're able to do a full profile on. So we're in a whole different world.
It's quite scary to know that your DNA can be found at a crime scene. The fact that science has been developed so much in modern society that mistakes still happen.
It really does make you question everything you do at a crime scene.
This man could have been put into prison for the rest of his life for something that he hadn't done.
After 5 months on remand, the charges against Lucas are dropped.
It was a huge relief, I think, for everybody because it just wasn't fitting together. Custody is stressful on anybody, but in particular for those that suffer from mental illness, it exacerbates symptoms. It is not a good place for him. So it was good for us to get him out as soon as possible.
Lucas's story sent shockwaves through the criminal justice community.
This case was groundbreaking. It was the first criminal case in the United States of what we call direct transfer proven on a homicide case. And initially, I'll tell you, there was a lot of resistance, not only within the legal community, but within the scientific community.
DNA evidence, however good it is, it's also really important to check the provenance of that DNA. How has it got into that scene and how relevant is it?
DNA evidence, when done properly, is solid evidence. But when we say things like, can we trust it? It's not can we trust the science if science is done well. It's can we trust juries and people to interpret it properly? I think a lot of us that participated, we all asked, now we know better, how do we do better? And so what Lucas's case taught us is you got to check yourself on that bias.
Because he's an individual that's coming from an impoverished background, the why and the hows can sometimes become a blur. And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals that can't defend themselves in society. A lot of individuals that probably don't have the finance in order to argue.
I think that Lucas has a great deal of resilience to him. He's had childhood trauma. I mean, he was raised on the streets. But one of the reasons why he has always given me permission to talk about his case is it broke his heart because on the news, they put his photograph up as a murderer. And he was always concerned that his mother had seen that. And so he has always been a proponent of wanting his story to get out there, not just because he wants other people not to have what happened to him happen, but also that his mother would find out that he wasn't a killer.
After almost jailing an innocent man, the case against the 3 other suspects must be bulletproof. So far, Javier Garcia, D'Angelo Austin, and his sister, Katrina Fritz, have refused to speak to investigators about the fatal robbery. But then, Fritz unexpectedly asks to meet with police.
Her attorney contacted the district attorney's office and said that she would like to speak with us again, talk about giving a statement. We transported her back to the police station, and we spent the rest of the day, it's probably a good 5-6 hours, doing an interview of her, and her just telling us everything.
Katrina was quite instrumental in this home invasion. She knew it all. She had access. She created a map, and in that map it showed what rooms were going to be open, where things may be, things that these intruders could have utilized to execute their plan.
She insists she didn't know the robbery would be so violent, and eventually agrees to a plea deal.
She gave us the identity of a third guy that was there. It turned out he was a friend of D'Angelo Austin's, Marcellus Drummer. She gave us his phone number, and that phone number was traveling with D'Angelo Austin on that night to the scene and back.
Drummer is part of the Oakland gangs. He's brought into custody. Searchers of his home turn up a bracelet stolen from the Kumras. His DNA is compared to outstanding profiles found at the scene.
Partial DNA profile that matches the suspect can actually help to corroborate stories.
A partial sample from Raveesh's right hand gets a match.
The police are happy that she's telling the truth.
Drummer is also charged with murder. Four years on from the fatal robbery, the trials begin.
I always wondered why homicide trials took 3 to 5 years. It's because of all the laws and the buildup and everything. It's just a long process. Some of the family was there for the trial. I tried to make sure that they were okay. I can answer a lot of questions for them, try and help them come to some final decision in their mind on how things happened. I felt pretty good about the case that we had. If I'm going to try and put somebody away in jail for the rest of their life, I need to be 100% positive. And I was 100% positive.
Austin and Garcia are brought before the courts.
They just acted like it was a normal everyday thing. There was no remorse or anything.
So you've got young people that live within these particular environments that unfortunately grow up where these things are normal, where criminality is normal, where violence is normal, where homicide is normal, desensitizes human beings.
As part of her plea deal, Fritz takes the stand to testify against her brother and his co-defendants.
Where people may be getting sentenced for long periods of time. Sometimes it's every man for themselves.
After hearing the evidence, the jury retires to consider their verdicts.
I was very nervous because if you have to go to jury trial, it's a 50-50 shot. The district attorney and I are both standing, and I think my palms were sweaty. It was such a relief when they came through with the guilty verdict.
D'Angelo Austin, Javier Garcia, and Marcellus Drummer are sentenced to life without parole. Fritz is sentenced to 17 years for robbery and false imprisonment.
I was happy that who I believe did it actually did do it, and I proved that forensically and through other evidence. I was equally, if not more, happy that I was able to prove that Lucas Anderson did not do it. On the other side of it, though, is you have to make sure that the family is taken care of.
A home invasion is extremely traumatic. It's a violation of your privacy. Home is supposed to be a safe space.
They've been victimized, And I think good cops have to remember to help the victims through the process. Crimes like these impact families a lot. Super hard for them.